Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. Today, we will be talking about psychological tips for effective learning and memory retention. And we are joined by renowned psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Verny, who will be sharing his expert tips on the topic. Hello, Dr. Thomas Verny.
Good morning. Good morning. A pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to say. Let's kick things off with your story, Dr. Verny. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you in your passion for understanding how we learn and remember?
Well, like you said at the beginning, I'm a psychiatrist. And when I was a young psychiatrist, I was always interested in dreams. And one day, when I was working with a young patient, suddenly, in the midst of telling me about his dream, he started crying like a little baby. And he continued like that for about 10 minutes. And then he sort of came out of it. And I asked him what had happened. And he said that he had just found himself in a crib. He was a little baby and he was crying for his mother. And then he said, being a somewhat skeptical young lawyer, he said, there's something wrong with this memory that I just had, or this picture that I just saw, because the crib that I found myself in was white. And actually, I have seen pictures of myself as a baby, and they were always taken in a blue crib. So I said to him, well, why don't you go speak to your mother about this and see what she says? So he went home, and next week he came back for his next session, and he said, this is amazing. I told my mother about what just happened here, and she said, the first 2 months of your life, we did not have enough money to buy you a crib. And so we borrowed a crib from a neighbor, and that was white. And only after 2 months did we buy you a new crib, and that was blue, and that's where all the pictures were taken. So that kind of gave me a pause. And I was, if I may say so myself, very well educated. I went to some very fine universities, including Harvard in Boston. And we were always taught that children before the age of 2 or even 3 don't remember anything. So how could this happen? But then, as I started talking to other people about this, I started getting more and more stories of sort of a similar content, with people remembering what happened to them at the time of birth or even pre-birth. And so that's when I became interested in memory. And whether truly, what people were being taught at universities and schools was incorrect. And so that eventually led me on a long journey into trying to find out what children really could remember before the age of 2. And then in 1981, I wrote my book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And in it, I put all the knowledge that was available at that time to demonstrate that, in fact, children could remember what happened to them at the time of birth, and even perhaps prior to. So, as you probably know, that book was very successful, way beyond my expectations. At the moment, I think it has been published in 36 countries. I'm not sure whether it's published in Georgia, but
I have not come across Georgian translation, but I have seen English copies in Georgia.
Oh, very good, very good. Well, like I say, there are 36. Just last year, they were published in Slovak and Czech. And I think I was going to say Yugoslavia, but a Serbian translation, I think, is in the offing. So it's getting around. Anyway, after the publication of the book, of course, I continued to have an interest in prenatal and perinatal psychology. But one thing sort of bothered me, and that was that there were people who seemed to remember things that happened to them prior to the last trimester. In other words, even at conception. And that didn't seem possible in terms of what we knew in terms of, brain development and things of that nature. And so I always had an interest in that. And then about 7 years ago, I read in a medical journal about a Frenchman, I think he was 42 years old, who went to see his doctor because he had a weakness in his left leg. And when they did all kinds of investigations, including an X-ray of the head, they found that he had virtually no brain tissue. All he had was a lot of water on the brain and a thin crust of brain tissue. In other words, he had hydrocephalus, is the medical term. And so this man was married, he had 2 children, and he was employed in the French civil service. So I thought to myself, how is this possible? How is it possible that a person with virtually no brain can function so well? And so that put me then on a journey to explore that. And out of that grew my most recent book, The Embodied Mind. And that also now is in 5 countries, not in your country yet, but it is in Russia. It has been published in Russian. And it has been published in Spanish and Greek and several other languages. Anyway, in The Embodied Mind, I document the fact that all our cells in our bodies, not just the brain cells, can contain memories. And that really the rest of your body acts as kind of a backup system to the brain. So if anything goes wrong with the brain, we are still able to have memories. So that has been sort of my most recent exploration of memory. And of course, I've always been interested in how people remember and how they use those memories and how they study and how they learn. So I have taught at several universities. So that really brings you up to date.
That's such a fascinating insight, because while I was listening, I had this, from my personal experience, I've told this story in my family a few years ago, because I had this vivid memory of myself.
Yes.
And the setting, the environment, everything. We were having a trip in the countryside when I was 2 months old. But in my mind, I thought I would be maybe 2, 3, 4 years old. So when I just during like dinner time, when I was reminiscing on this trip, everybody was looking at me like I was crazy, because my mother started laughing. No way that you could recall these details because you were just 2 months old. And I was, I don't know, amazed. And I kind of forgot about this fact, but right now, all I could think about was this from my personal experience. So I'm sure a lot of students who are listening right now might relate to this experience, because I don't think this is very uncommon among us.
No. And that actually brings us to a very, very important point, in order to study well, you have to be curious. And very often, curiosity is stamped out very early by parents who don't understand that or who don't have the time for it. So when, like yourself, your mother said, how could you possibly remember it? You were only 2 months old.
You can still believe in me. and what I said. They just laughed about it.
Yes, right. Okay. But they kind of said that there was something wrong with you or it couldn't happen. Like there was a negative tone to it.
Yeah, and the solution they found to this was, oh, maybe you remember all of this because you saw some pictures taken.
Right.
I have never seen a single picture from that trip.
Exactly. Exactly. So, they undermine your own belief in the reality of it, right? I mean, my own experience, for example, has been that very early on, I don't know, I was 6 or 7 years old. I was at school. I was singing in a choir, and the teacher came up to me and said, "Don't think, just open up your mouth as if you were singing because you have a deaf ear." And from that moment on, I never sang.
Very cruel to do something to a child.
Yes, it is very cruel, but that happens, all the time. And that discourages people from asking questions, and then it discourages them from being curious. And if you're not curious, it's very difficult to learn. If you're not interested in what's happening, it's very difficult to learn. So, curiosity is one of the fundamental traits that people must have in order to succeed in life. And so, going back to, your original sort of interest in effective learning, it has to start with parents. So much in the literature of the psychology of learning and education is focused on things that teachers can do. But hardly ever does anybody look at what the child, student, whatever, is bringing with him, her into the school. Okay? Like they are burdened already with all kinds of problems. They are burdened by the fact that very often one of the parents or both of them are authoritarian. When you have authoritarian parents, the child begins to distrust authority. It becomes rebellious. It becomes antisocial. He or she brings that into the educational system. They will be rebellious. They will not accept what the teacher is saying. There is already a negative mindset that they bring into the situation. So these are the kinds of things that you do not find, by and large, in educational books or articles or anything of that sort. The relationship between a teacher and a student is a relationship. And that because you and I have a relationship right now at the moment. The moment you are talking to someone, you're establishing a relationship. It may be strong, it may be weak, but it's a relationship. And so what the student brings into the relationship with the teacher depends to a great deal on the kind of relationship they had with their parents. So if there is bonding and attachment right at the beginning, then they will be having and expecting to establish positive relationships with other people. If the relationship has been negative, antagonistic, or at least ambivalent, they will bring that with them into the relationship. So for teachers really need to understand, and there are some wonderful, wonderful teachers around, but by and large, I don't think that they are sufficiently informed about the fact that they really have to do more than just teaching a subject. A teacher really has to be a bit of a social worker, a bit of a psychologist, a bit of an actor. They have to make the subject interesting. So
I would, sorry,
go ahead.
Ask about the curiosity. So we understand the importance of curiosity in effective learning. So it's a bad thing that parents most of the time might kill this instinct in children from the early age, but what could you tell students who would like to cultivate this curiosity again in themselves? Like, what will be the effective way to cultivate it?
Well, the first thing is to ask yourself, how curious are you? Am I a curious person? Am I really interested in the world? What am I interested in? What turns me on? Is it baseball or is it reading poetry? What is it that turns me on? Let's go with the positive. Anything that turns a person on, if they ask themselves, what am I interested in? Then it's very important for that student to continue to feed into that, to look at his environment and see where he can get more of what he's interested in. Because with that, other things will come along. So if you're interested, I don't know, if you're interested in music, for example, learn about the great composers, start playing an instrument, get your parents to buy you, perhaps for your birthday or Christmas or whatever it is, an instrument. And if there's not enough money for that, perhaps you can work part-time, make some money yourself, and get an instrument. In other words, you have to feed your interest.
And take risks.
And take risks, yes. That's a wonderful point that you're just mentioning. Again, it starts with parenting. Some parents discourage children from taking risks. Some children are so afraid of making a mistake because they have been punished for making a mistake that they are afraid to take risks, because risks have a natural built-in propensity for going wrong. I mean, if you take a risk, I don't know, let's say you buy a lottery, just for the sake of argument. Well, the chances are that you're not going to win, but you don't mind because perhaps next time you might win. You understand what the risks are and you don't mind taking it. But if you feel that you're going to be punished for making the wrong move, then you will never take risks. So again, the beginning, the parenting is paramount. And if you can recognize, and this is where we need to have insightful children, and perhaps we can help them by my talking to you about this and many other podcasts that you do. We can help them to recognize that they are afraid of taking risks. How did they become afraid of taking risks? And how can they overcome taking this fear of risk? Because the important thing, I mean, in my practice as a psychiatrist, I so often find people who will be kind of paralyzed in life because they're afraid to move out, perhaps to take a new job. Perhaps when they go to university, they don't know which course to take. And so, perhaps one course sounds more interesting, but also more challenging, more difficult, and I might fail. So I'm not going to take that. I'll take an easy course rather than the one that I really want to take.
And I think also we need to remind students, myself included, I'm not a student anymore, but I'm still at young age.
Yeah.
But this is the age that you need to take risks before you have much more responsibilities. But myself included, I often fall into patterns of thinking that this life is so serious, and I don't realize that there are a lot more responsibilities that will come later in life. So while I need to take much more risks. So it will let me think out of box and try new things, stay curious, and develop myself and skills within me. So just to remind students, this is not the age to just say no to things.
Exactly. Beautifully put. Beautifully put. Yes, this is not the age. This is the age to say yes and, take your chances. What the hell? You are young. Uh, if you don't travel now, for example, when are you going to do it? When you are married and you have 3 children to support?
Exactly.
Right. So, take risks and don't be afraid of the consequences, which then brings us to another point, which is, have some self-confidence. If you see yourself as kind of weak and needing a lot of support, then you will never do anything dangerous, so to speak, riskier, and you will never develop your full potential. And so, one of my problems actually with the educational system as it is now is that they have a tendency to treat children as weak, as like little candles, that if you will blow on them, they will immediately go out. The flame will go out if you blow on them. So if you say a word perhaps that might upset them, oh my God, they're just gonna fall apart. So rather than, they're treating children as if they were fragile, and that there's no expectation that they will go stronger from encounter with ideas that may be perhaps uncomfortable to them, okay? But that's the only way you can grow in strength. It's very similar to the immune system, okay? If you protect a child constantly from bacteria and viruses and, raise them in a totally healthy environment that's totally protected from all kinds of bacteria and viruses, sooner or later, when they go out on the street or anywhere else, they'll get terribly sick because
they will never develop immune system.
Exactly. And this is what's happening now all the time in the educational system. Books are being banned because they may upset a child. Here in I'm from Canada. I'm speaking from Ontario, which is one of the provinces in Canada, and they have just recently one educational organization. I can look it up for you. I don't want to misquote. 1 second. Where is it? Well, anyway, one educational organization, it was a Catholic Board of Education. Yes, here we are. So in October, the London District Catholic School Board decided to forbid teachers to teach the Book of Negroes by noted Canadian writer Lawrence Hill. Have you ever heard of it? Book of Negroes? It's a fantastic book. It's an incredible book on slavery. It's about a young African woman who is taken away, put on a ship, on a slave ship, brought to America, mistreated, all that kind of stuff. It's an incredible anti-slavery book. It is beautiful. It won all kinds of prizes and awards. Well, it has been taken off the list of teaching at this particular school board because it has the word nigger in it several times. So this may upset some students, so the board thinks, which is ridiculous. Last year in the United States, 10,000 books were banned. 10,000 books. This is like going back to the Middle Ages. This is incredible. We don't need this. Children have to be children, students, young adults.
It's part of our history.
Yes.
This part of our it's not very far apart from nowadays. It's like recent history.
It's recent. It's very recent history.
Today.
And how are we going to fight prejudice and racism if we don't know the history of it?
Exactly.
And if we can't use the words that were used at that time. So this is not pejorative. Nobody is using it against a particular student. This is history. So what I'm saying is that there is so much of this kind of protectionism, going on, which rather than making students stronger, makes them weaker. At universities, you have safe rooms now, and professors have to give warnings of perhaps triggering something in the students. So if you're going to talk about, I don't know, the Armenian genocide, for example, there might be some Turkish students in the room that might find this uncomfortable. Well, it's history.
It's history. We need to be objective and less emotional, I would say, in order to deal with things, because it's life.
It's life.
And I would say this is a problem of adults, because this is the thing that adults decide, and students just are there to follow the rules, I would say. They're the victims of these rules.
Yes.
Let's get back to the point of you were mentioning the self-confidence.
Sure.
And let's say students often lack self-confidence during exams, I would say. So they often face stress, sleepless nights during the exam seasons.
Yes.
And what would you say, how much of an effect this has on memory retention?
Oh, that's all your questions are good, but that's a particularly good one. Yes, we know from lots of research that stress decreases your ability to retain information. Stress interferes both with the entry of information into the brain and the processing of information. In the brain, there is a structure which is called the amygdala, and the amygdala is the gateway to the brain. And under stress, that is one of the first structures in the brain that is adversely affected. So what happens under stress is that you produce a lot of stress hormones, which then are, of course, taken to every part of your body, including the brain. And then the brain begins to suffer adversely because of all the cortisone that's present there. Cortisone also has the ability to actually destroy synapses, the meeting points of nerves where they connect, the connecting links between nerves. And also, if there's a lot of cortisone, hydrocortisone, adrenaline, any of those stress hormones, they can actually destroy nerve cells. So if the nerve cells in the amygdala and related structures are destroyed, obviously, the hardwiring of the brain is not going to work as well as it is supposed to. So both on a neurological level, and then just the plain stress that the student has to think about other things. For example, if the parents are divorcing and they're fighting amongst each other, this is going to affect the student, of course, both neurologically, the way I've just described, but also psychologically, because they will be worried and anxious, and that also produces more stress hormones. One of the things, that I would really like to advocate is that teachers need to learn about their students' family and family relationships. Because, like I said right at the beginning, every teacher has to be a bit of a social worker and a psychologist. And you can't just assume that all the students in your room, in your classroom, are the same. This is not a homogeneous entity. Everybody is bringing their own problems into the classroom. And particularly at public school or high school level, less so at university, but certainly in the lower grades, what goes on in the family home has a huge influence on how well the student can learn in the classroom. So if the teacher understands that perhaps this is like a single family home, for example, or that the student doesn't have enough food in the home, or he doesn't get enough sleep because of all kinds of other problems, these things the teacher needs to know and perhaps deal with it, you know? So I think that this is sort of the psychology of relationships between teachers and students that is not given sufficient attention to.
This is a great explanation also of my original question, because we all the time hear that stress is bad, don't stress yourself, but I don't think we really understood what goes on into our nervous system and into our bodies during this time. So I would also say, I had this point about the cramming before exams. When students try to learn everything in a very short amount of time, I think this also increases their cortisol, as you said, because
Yes.
this stress, right?
Yes.
As well as the sleepless nights when they pull nighters to study before the exam. So when you understand that these come with a lot of internal issues that will negatively affect your exams and studying process, I think we will be doing better at preparing for exams in advance, let's say, for better memory retention as well.
Absolutely. Actually, there are some really good studies that demonstrate significant benefits of spacing in your learning, okay? It's much better to space your learning. In other words, each day spend, let's say, an hour on one subject instead of spending 5 hours on that one subject, and then next day spending 5 hours on another subject. All the research in this area seems to indicate that spaced learning is much better. And of course, cramming is terrible. Cramming really doesn't work. There's so much anxiety when you're cramming that by the time you come into the examination room, you have forgotten half of the stuff. The other important thing, you know, if you want to get tips, is summarizing is terribly important. And a lot of students don't do that, which I really don't understand why. I think the answer is that they don't have time for it, because they don't spend their time wisely, which is another problem.
Time management issues, exactly.
Time management issues is a huge problem. They don't learn it, particularly at the university level, you know, when you're taking 5 or 6 subjects. There are all kinds of other things to do, like in Georgia, I suppose you go to soccer games. In the United States and Canada, you go to football games, baseball games, basketball games, hockey. There are so many things to do. There are parties to go to. And then suddenly 1 week before exams, they start studying. So, you know, looking at your sort of year ahead of time, or your semester ahead of time, and making up a list of on which days you're going to study which subjects would be a terrific thing to do. Very few people do that, but I think as an ideal, that's what I would highly recommend. You know, if you can look at your subjects and decide which days of the week, or at least which week you will spend on certain subjects and how much time they will require. And then once you know that, then you can decide how you're going to spend your free time, but not the other way around. You spend as much as you like on free time, and then suddenly you run out of time to study.
This is actually really great advice. I've never thought about it when I was a student. I wish I knew.
There you go. There you go. And the other thing is summarizing. Like, I personally don't have a good memory. And so, getting through medical school and then psychiatry is very, very difficult, especially if you are in a good school. Like I was at the University of Toronto. The competition is incredible. And, you are expected to know a lot. And the only way that I could get through was to summarize, and then very often I would make summaries of summaries. And the very fact that you're writing it, or nowadays putting it on your computer, already is helpful in terms of remembering things. The more senses you involve in memory, the better. So, for example, to remember names, it's very good to associate them with something else. So your name is Sopho. So I would think of Sophia because that's easier for me to remember. And then I would think of Sophia, the Greek goddess of wisdom. And so I would say, oh, yes, wisdom, and she's interested in education. So who's that? Oh, yes, Sophia, Sopho. There we are. And now I will remember it for a very long time because I've made some associations.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this same thing happens then when you make summaries, because you involve your hand, your body. So more than just memorizing. And then the other thing that really works well is to ask yourself questions before exams. So, think of the questions that you may be asked on a certain subject, and then ask those questions of yourself. And if you don't know the answers, then look it up. That will help you to remember. But if you just read over and over again your notes or whatever was given to you on the computer, whatever, that is not as useful as asking yourself sort of exam questions, because that's when you will discover what you don't know.
Great explanation. You also mentioned the senses. For me personally, the biggest helper was visualization.
Yes.
Whenever I would read something, I would always paint a picture and associate some vivid images with the text, and it helped me a lot.
Yeah, that's good, but you can't do it with everything. When you have a lot of things to study, like, for example, in medicine, when you have to study like all the arteries and nerves in the arm, there's just too much to visualize. But if you can do it, it's fine. Again, some people are good at it. Obviously, you were, and it's something worth trying. If that doesn't work, try something else. I was able very often to I would make myself 6 or 7 points about something, and then I was able to close my eyes and I could see the whole page. I could see the 6 or 7 points that I made to myself, or at least I would remember that there were 7 points. If everything else disappeared, at least I knew that there were 7 things that one could say about a certain subject. What are the most common cases of pneumonia, for example? So, there might be 6 or 7 causes of pneumonia, bacterial, viral, cancer, things of that nature. And if I knew that there were 7, then as I was starting the exam, I would find 2 or 3, and then I knew that there were at least 4 more, and then gradually they came up. So summarizing, I really believe very strongly in.
So these points were the helpers into memorizing the information. But what about the biggest mistake students do that doesn't allow them to retain memory? What would be the major challenges, if I explained clearly.
Oh, you did. Yes, no problem. I think one of the major challenges is that they are not interested in the subject. So when they go to the lecture, if they do go, when depending, whether they're university level or lower, well, let's say that they go, they attend the lecture, but they're not interested. They might even be, watching their cell phones, which is allowed in some places and not allowed in others, but they might be looking at their cell phones and doing emails and texting each other and stuff of that nature. So not interested. They don't remember anything that was being said at the lecture. Then they go home. They figure that that particular subject somehow does not interest them. Why should they study? And so exams roll around, and they might make sort of a vain attempt at picking up a few points, but the lack of interest is fundamental. And that's where a good teacher comes in, who can really motivate people. There are good teachers who can make any subject interesting. Perhaps mathematics might be a little bit difficult, but even that can be done. And then, motivation is incredibly important. I think that the student, the student has to have some knowledge of himself. We really can't do without that. If you're dealing with a person who has kind of already decided that they are not going to go the academic route, for example, okay? I'm going to become a plumber. I'm going to become an electrician, whatever. I'm not interested in Shakespeare. I'm not interested in Georgian history. I just want to become a plumber or a gardener or, truck driver, whatever. Well, I think that
People find the motivation to push themselves into really making an effort to learn the subject.
So, yes. And again, I go back to parents and teachers. Parents and teachers have to somehow impress upon their children that even if you want to become a plumber or an electrician or whatever, a nurse, you have to become a human being. And a human being means that they are knowledgeable about the world, about how other people function. They have to be interested in their community. They have to be interested in more than just themselves. Okay? So personal growth, creativity, self-exploration, citizenship, these are the things that really matter. And that's why you're going to school, not just so that you can become whatever it is that you think you want to become, not just to have a career, but to be a fully human being. And again, I don't think there's too much of that in schools.
So it really comes down to really realizing that you are not there only just to pass exams and just to get a diploma, but again, to stay curious and just gather a lot of information around you. So be knowledgeable and take pride in it.
Yes. So, you're going to school, but at the same time, you're growing older every day and you're becoming more and more of an adult. And what do we want adults to be in this world? So, if you're going to become an adult, you're not just going to be a plumber or a teacher or a university professor, whatever. You will also have to be a member of the community. And how can you contribute to a healthy community? How can you contribute to peace in the world, especially nowadays when there is so much struggle going on everywhere? It is more important than ever to raise good citizens.
Exactly. I agree. And also, I would also suggest that to myself also and to a lot of students that do not specifically decide for yourself that I want to be this, I will become this. It's good to have aspirations, of course, and to have motivation, but don't decide the future for yourself. Just let the things come to you, and again, gain knowledge, because you never know that when it will come in handy.
Very good. In other words, be open.
Yes, be open to
Be open.
your.
Be open. Don't close the doors before you really know what's happening.
I agree.
And yeah, stay open. Sorry. Stay open to new ideas. Just because you're 14 years old and you already think that you know what you want to do in life, that's great. Fine. Okay, stick to that. But at the same time, let yourself be open to the possibility that you might change your mind. And so just take in as many experiences as you can.
Exactly. And speaking of that, do you think there are surprising habits that we might not think of that students can adapt to improve their memory retention? Some unusual ways, let's say, if you can think of any.
Unusual ways.
Or maybe interesting routine, let's say.
Well, I don't know whether that's unusual, but comprehension seems to be a really big problem with some students. And asking questions when you don't understand something, or Googling and trying to find out from the internet, the great resource out there, which is really fantastic if you use it correctly. Excuse me. But, don't be afraid to admit that you don't know, and then go after what you don't know. Try to find out, you know, what you don't know. Don't be shy to find out what you don't know. I can't think of unusual ways. I think that what we have discussed pretty well covers the subject. I think getting enough rest and sleep is also very important in terms of learning, because many students, especially when they live in dormitories around universities, are so busy with their social lives that they don't get enough sleep, they don't get enough rest. They eat lousy food, high carbohydrate, high salt, high sugar. All of that is incredibly unhealthy, and that is going to affect their brains also. If you don't have enough brain food, your brain is going to suffer. But I think that if a student can, take care of their time in terms of how much they're studying, how much they are resting, how much they are socializing, and then set some time aside for all those activities. Go to school with an open mind. Be interested even in things they are not interested in. Let's see if this is really going to somehow be interesting for me. Again, openness to information that also seems boring. Okay, this is so boring, or this has nothing to do with my life. Well, perhaps it does.
Transform your way of thinking, maybe force yourself for a few days, weeks, and then it will become a habit.
Right. And like you said, be open. be open to the possibility that you might just learn to like it. I mean, very often we sort of make decisions very early, and we don't like this teacher, or I don't like this classroom, or I don't like the students in this classroom, or whatever. Well, hold on, take it easy, give it a chance. Give it a chance.
Yes, even if you make a decision, don't think that it has to be a strict and firm decision. Like, you can always change, you're allowed to change your opinions and change your thoughts about things, because this is real life. This is not black and white. So again, be open.
Exactly. And also in terms of taking risk, that we were talking about before, just because you have made up your mind and you're thinking of changing it, doesn't mean that you were wrong. It just means that you made up your mind on the basis of insufficient evidence, and now it's time to change, and that's all right.
Exactly. And circumstances are also changing. Maybe it was right when you decided it.
Yeah.
But now it's another day, it's another minute. So
yes, right.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
we are on the same page.
Yes, I'm happy. And as for the resources, let's say some helpful books, maybe online applications and tools, do you know any useful tools that we can suggest students to use for, again, better memory retention?
Well, sure, there are a lot of books. But they're mostly written for academics, for educators, and very often, the information in it is just so, I don't know, kind of distant from everyday life. It's so academic, so philosophical. Very often, they give names to things that you and I would understand in simple language, but they give it like more complicated words. So, I wrote out some examples of that, because like I told you, I have a lousy memory.
Ironic. Can
Yes, you can. So I'm just clicking on it. Okay, here we are. There's the book. There's a good book. It's called The Science of Effective Learning with Spacing and Retrieval Practice. And this is by S.K. Carpenter, published in 2022. The Science of Effective Learning with Spacing and Retrieval Practice.
We talked about spacing.
Yeah, we did talk about spacing, and retrieval practice is nothing more than how to remember. Okay, so that's called retrieval practice. It's a little bit like in medicine, when a doctor doesn't know why you have what it is that you have. Let's say that you have a headache and they can't find the reason for a headache. You don't have a tumor, whatever. So then they call it idiopathic, which simply means I don't know what it is. But they give it a lovely title, okay? Idiopathic. Doesn't that sound so much better than saying I don't know? Of course. But, the doctor gets paid for it, so he can't just say I don't know, because then you wouldn't pay him for the visit. But if he says idiopathic, oh, well, yes, okay, fine, sure.
Still think that he knows, but actually he doesn't know.
Doesn't know. So, a lot of stuff that I find in these books and writings is like that. For example, the abstract says research on the psychology of learning has highlighted straightforward ways of enhancing learning. However, effective learning strategies are underused by learners, etc., etc., etc. And essentially, they talk about what we have spoken about, but they fill up a whole book. But it's if you're interested, it's a good book. What I liked actually was a book which is called Historical Review of Learning Strategies Research. Strategies for the Whole Learner. And that is by B.L., capital B, capital L, McCombs, M, capital M, small c, capital C, Combs, just like a comb that you use. McCombs, 2017. Historical Review of Learning. Now, that is a very good book. It's very big. It's very large. I don't know how many hundreds of pages, but it is a very good historical review of learning strategies research. Strategies for the whole learner. I don't know what has happened to the word student during the last 20 years or so. I don't know what's wrong with calling a student, but now all the books and publications do not mention the word student anymore. It's all about learners.
Maybe I would say society perceives a student of any young age, and learner is basically every age. So
okay,
just
okay.
a thought.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem, I don't know. It's strange. Like in my particular interest, with dealing with pregnant women, nowadays any journal does not talk about pregnant women anymore. It's pregnant people. Pregnant people. You can't say in a medical journal anymore pregnant women, because I don't know, there might be 1 out of 1 million people who are perhaps males who have had surgery, and somehow they have a uterus, and God knows they might be able to have a child. I don't know, 1 in 1 million. And because of that 1 in 1 million, we have to say pregnant people instead of pregnant women. We no longer talk about breastfeeding. We talk about chest feeding. So
interesting.
It hasn't reached Georgia yet.
Not as much as it's in the Western countries.
It's terrible. I hate it.
Yes, that's not the situation right now here, but we live in a lot of genders society right now, so a lot of rules and changes, I would say.
Right. So anyway, to answer your question, those 2 books, are very good. I would recommend them if people are really interested. But I think I would not recommend students or learners to read too much about the psychology of learning or effective. I think if they do all the things that we have talked about, that's all they need to do. Okay. There is no point in learning about, some research that was done, in the UK or Ireland or France on 39 students in this and this age, and how they answered the questions and all that kind of stuff. It's irrelevant. The important thing is to be curious, to be interested, to take good notes, to understand what is being taught, to learn about it, to understand the subject, to develop an emotional relationship with the subject, to get along with the teacher. These are the things that you need to do. You don't need to learn about psychology.
Yes, and I would also add that your mind is the strongest thing and best tool And if you will just believe in it and believe in the power of your mind, then you will have a great memory, great retention, and just the learning process will be much easier. But if reading about a lot of research and studies in other countries will help you to believe in your mind strengths, then feel free to do so.
Of course, yes, sure. If that's your interest, then by all means, do it. But in terms of actual learning, you don't need any of that.
Trust your brain and mind.
Right. Trust your brain and mind. Yes, yes, and trust your teachers, and you will be just fine.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Verny. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation. I am leaving our podcast very educated, very happy that our thoughts aligned on a lot of matters. And I'm happy that I got the chance to contribute to the conversation with you. And thanks for all the students who has been part of this podcast and who took notes. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Sopho, it was a pleasure and an honor. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Take care. You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.